Hi guys, welcome back to The Social Tune and a brand new episode of Record Roundup. So as it turns out, we have even less time than I originally thought, as today is Christmas Eve and we only have a few days left till I actually have to drop my year-end lists. Meaning they're either going to be a couple of days late, which wouldn't be the worst thing in the world, or I'm going to have to put in a lot of work in order to get them out when I want them to. Whatever I decide to do, I still need to film this, edit it, and put it out within the next couple of days. So remember, timestamps are now in the description if you want to skip to me talking about a particular album you want to hear about. And with that said, let's dive in. So does anybody remember me actually reviewing As It Is' last album? I actually remember it quite well, as it seemed to be one of those pop-punk albums that was trying a little bit more, but failed to really grab me because the songwriting would be a bit childish and not every single song was that catchy. However, it did have some real standouts on it, including one of my top 50 songs of last year, Pretty Little Distance. And that song in particular gave me a lot of hope for As It Is, and made me wonder where they were going to go in the future. Well, as it turns out, just over a year later, they decided to release The Great Depression, an album that I was curious about, not just because of the title of course, but because as I did in my last video, I could see a lot of room for improvement, but I could definitely see a band with a lot of promise to them. So I was wondering if this would be any better. And as it turns out, yeah, it's a lot better. This is a weird case because typically when you tell an act they have a lot of promise, it usually takes them maybe 5 years to really refine their sound. But this is such a huge jump in quality that I was honestly taken aback. The melodies on this album are sharper than ever, the emotional performance from our frontman is pretty jaw-dropping, and the writing in particular has gotten incredibly good. It's poetic, it's nuanced, it conveys a ton of emotion, and most of all, pretty much every single song on this album is catchy as hell. This is easily one of the best pop-punk albums I've heard all year, and I certainly didn't expect it to come from As It Is, who, like I said before, a year earlier were only a pretty good band with a lot of promise to them. But here, yeah, they really do show off their chops in the best possible way. From incredibly catchy hooks like the title track and Wounded World, to the more atmospheric pieces like Two Tongues or The Hurt the Hope. And not only are the guitar tones sharp and strident, but they can occasionally pick up some real rough texture to them, like the chugging riff on The Fire the Dark. Not only that, but our frontman has gotten a lot more raw as well. On the first album, he could be a little bit wistful and he had a really good voice for the poppy hooks, and that definitely does come across here on some of the more poppy songs, but on other songs here, he almost gets a growled texture to his voice that fits surprisingly well. Or to sum it all up, when your band is reminding me of an early era pop-punk Marianas Trench, that's a really good sign. And no, obviously they're not as amazing as that band, after all that's my favorite band of all time, but the fact that you can remind me of them in terms of your talent for hooks and your frontman, that's a big step in the right direction. So yeah, I didn't expect this, but this is an 8 out of 10. Yeah, it's a great album, and not one that I was expecting at all. True, this won't be for everyone, but if you're a fan of pop punk, this is not one you're going to want to miss. I don't know how they did it, but congratulations As It Is, you earned this. So as most of you will probably know, XXXTentacion was shot and murdered a few months back. And despite all my problems with him as a person, many people were very sad that he had died. It affected many of his fans and brought a lot of people within the music industry together in mourning. And so of course, the record label had to come in and profit off of him. And look, I've made this argument before. Back when I've talked about Drake or Justin Timberlake collaborating with Michael Jackson. It's just in bad taste, and it's automatically something that I'm naturally against. But you know what? Let's just compare the two in terms of talent for a second. Michael Jackson was arguably the biggest pop star to ever have lived. And it was a few years before the record label thought, well, we might as well use these songs that he left behind but never really finished. Because let's be real here, XXXTentacion was no Michael Jackson. He didn't have the talent or the range or the charisma that Michael had, and more to the point, he was too young to have that much saved up. Michael Jackson had a whole back catalogue of stuff that he had never released, so it made sense to release it to the public because it was more or less a finished product, even if it didn't sound as good as Michael could have made it had he been alive. This, on the other hand, is so blatant and so minimalistic that it's honestly kind of shocking. All this is a couple of looped random vocal snippets from the dead man himself, put to soulless beats and puppeted out in front of his fan base just to profit off them even more. And look, quite apart from my obvious statement of the man is dead, just let him rest in peace, the songs themselves have so little meat to them that they're clearly not trying. And seeing it all paraded out in front of us is frankly just disgusting. And because they're so minimalist, there's not even a track on here that I would even say qualifies as a full song. Honestly, the fact that this was sold to X's fans at all is just insulting. It's like if X released an entire album where every single track was just changes over and over again, and yet somehow even more minimalistic. And on top of that, once again, it's not X releasing it, it's his managers, his producers, and the other guest artists who feature on this, all of whom are just profiting off of his death and trying to make a quick buck off of a bunch of fans who are still mourning after the death of someone they're huge fans of. This is honestly the most disgusting thing that I've listened to in years. And say what you will about other posthumous albums, there was more effort put into them than this, where every single song isn't just nothing, it's awful. And you have features like Kanye West, who really has worn out my patience at this point, spewing all of this ridiculous political bullshit he knows nothing about, and clearly just here so that he, like everybody else involved in this, can profit off of the death of this kid, someone who is younger than I am. So yeah, say what you will about the Lil Xanarchies, the Geminis, and everything else that's been released over the past few years, even Kodak Black's material, all of it is worth a lot more than this soulless garbage. I hate everything about this, both on principle and in practice. And in every single sense of the word, it is a waste of time and money. This is it, guys. This is a 0 out of 10. I didn't know it was possible to piss me off this much or to make music that was this far below the bar of human decency. But somehow 2018 got one final punch in there. And if you think that there is going to be anything worse than this released towards the end of 2018, I'm not gonna listen to it. Fuck this album, skip it.
Nothing that they do is new. They so dumb. Oh, they so dumb. They ain't fooling me or you. They so dumb.
So, with that out of the way, let's talk about a hip-hop album that actually has a lot going for it. That being the newest release by Royce da 5'9". Now, most of you may know him as one half of Bad Meets Evil, the other half, of course, being Eminem, an affiliate of M's who's been around since the very beginning and who's been friends with him for years. They've kind of had an on and off rivalry where they fell out for a bit, true, but they've come back together stronger than ever and are still making music together, as is proved here on one of the best tracks here, Caterpillar. And what makes Book of Ryan so compelling is the fact that, unlike a lot of Royce's material where he's just kind of spitting bars about life and gangsta shit and about how awesome he is, this is an actual personal album, one where he reflects on his past. How he grew up in an abusive family with very unstable people surrounding him his entire life, and how that is now affecting him as a father, someone who has to pass on life's lessons to his son. And it's all framed by the name of the album, The Book of Ryan, which is a project that his son was working on about the person who inspired him most, and he decided to write about his dad, which is very sweet. But as he says on the album, he doesn't really know his dad, so what can he tell him? And so Royce gets more personal here than he's ever been before, talking about childhood, his relationship with his father, his relationship with his friends, and what we can all learn from that. And not only are there definite undertones of how dangerous the drug dealing life can be, but also, weirdly enough, the benefits that he has gained from it in terms of his own maturity. After all, he was inspired by his father, who used to sell cocaine but eventually stopped because he wanted to keep custody of his kids. Despite his father's abuse, he can tell that he was still trying and still loved him, and wonders what good lessons he can take away from that and yet also leave the bad stuff behind while being a father in his own right. On top of that, the album is wonderfully produced, so many of these hooks are incredibly catchy, and the guests on here are all absolutely excellent. If I did have one nitpick about this album, it would be that the production can be a little bit inconsistent, with some of the hooks being a tad annoying, especially when Royce steps onto the mic to sing the hooks himself. Not that he's a bad singer, but he can occasionally go into a falsetto that doesn't really flatter him, and some of these hooks are a little bit clumsy and awkward. But even so, this is one of the best hip-hop albums that you will hear this year, and not enough people have listened to it or given it the credit it so richly deserves. So yeah, it's a light 9 out of 10. It might just be Royce's best work to date. And for all of you who are constantly giving Eminem so much praise, just remember that Bad Meets Evil, it had 2 members for a reason. And while Eminem's material has arguably been going downhill since the old days, Royce only now seems to be getting truly interesting. So definitely give him a chance.
The roses are drying, though the orchid petals are falling. My love for you is undying. My love for you is undying. My love for you is undying.
You know, in 2016, one of the albums that baffled me the most was As Common as Light and Love Are Red Valleys of Blood by Sun Kil Moon. The album that Mark Kozelek decided to release that somehow worked for me way better than I could have ever expected. And look, this wasn't my first venture listening to Mark Kozelek. I had heard Benji and absolutely love it. I would honestly say it's the better of the 2 albums. But I was very sure that it was kind of a one-time thing, something that wouldn't work twice. But like I said in that review, he switched up the writing style on that 2016 album to kind of fit a narrative that was more like listening to somebody's trail of thought. And it really paid off in one of the best albums of his career and that year. But I was kind of assuming that Mark Kozelek was going to switch things up again on his new album. Because like I said, trying the same thing twice probably wasn't going to work as well. And while he actually did switch up his style yet again for his Sun Kil Moon release, which we'll talk about in just a second, first he decided to release a self-titled album after his own name, Mark Kozelek. And while the trail of thought writing style is very reminiscent of As Common as Light and Love Are Red Valleys of Blood, this is a much more personal look into his life. While that album was much more focused on the world around him and traveling on tour and what he learned from it, this one is about his roots, his hometown, and what has developed in his own life since the release of that last album. It's a smaller scope with fewer catchy hooks than that album had, but Mark Kozelek is such a detailed and intricate songwriter who brings up small details that no one else ever would, but it turns out to be naturally charming. I just loved listening to this guy supposedly ramble on, but the fact that you know that he was in the studio writing all of this out, and with some internal rhymes here and there, displays an effort that proves that this isn't just random ramblings. There is structure to it. There is method to the madness. And the fact that a lot of this album focuses both on himself and his wife is something that's very sweet, something that is a lot less abrasive than Mark Kozelek usually dares to show on his projects. It's easily the album where he's at his least untouchable, and while he is still smart, much like Father John Misty on God's Favorite Customer, he does allow himself to be vulnerable in front of his audience, and it really is kind of inspiring. Add on top of that the amazing melodies, and once again, that off-kilter writing style that I just have fallen in love with at this point. And yeah, this is a great album, surprisingly so. It's an 8 out of 10, and I definitely recommend you check it out, especially if you adored that last project. It may not have quite as many catchy and instant hooks as that project had, and it's definitely a lot shorter, but it has a similar charm to it that I can easily see myself coming back to time and time again. But like I said before, it's not all that he released this year.
Partridge and KK Downey and Glenn Tipton and Tony Iommi of Black Sabbath and Jimmy Page of Led Zeppelin. David Cassidy was so cool that I read his autobiography. It's called Come On Get Happy, and I recommend it highly.
Yeah, Mark Kozelek's new project as Sun Kil Moon is a bit of an interesting one. I remember saying on my review of As Common as Light and Love Are Red Valleys of Blood that he could probably benefit from making it even catchier and maybe going for shorter formed songs with hooks, as I could tell that he had a real talent for them. But as I said in my review of the self-titled one a minute ago, he didn't need the hooks on this new one and it turned out just fine. This, though, relies very heavily on hooks in a way that I'm honestly not that big a fan of. These songs are much more structured, and the hooks, surprisingly, aren't as catchy. And most of that does have to do with the instrumentation, which is a lot more synthetic and rubbery and more slick than a lot of what we got on As Common and Light and Love and on the new Mark Kozelek project. And unfortunately, I don't really have much to say about it because, like those projects, it is kind of off-kilter and rambling, but only in terms of the subjects that Mark Kozelek handles. In terms of the writing style and production, it has a much more mainstream and sleek appeal to it, which could be great for some fans and might be a good introduction to a lot of new people coming into his music, but for me, yeah, this just doesn't work. I could see it appealing to someone, but for me, it's only a really light 6 out of 10. I don't know, maybe I'm just someone who has fallen in love with a certain sound of his, and I don't really want to let go of it, but personally, the Mark Kozelek project is the better one, at least in my opinion.
You're not coming home with me tonight. You just want attention. You don't want my heart. Maybe you just hate the thought of me with someone new.
So I distinctly remember getting a lot of raised eyebrows when I gave this album an 8 out of 10 in my mid-year list of the best songs and albums of 2018. And you know what? I stand by it. Charlie Puth started out as one of my least favorite vocalists in music, and for him to release an entire album which is groove heavy and that I can enjoy from beginning to end, with almost no songs on it that I dislike, that's damn impressive. The writing is much more self-aware. Charlie Puth has gotten much better at knowing what style of production works for him. The guests on here are all fantastic, especially Boyz II Men, whom Charlie Puth actually measures up to on If You Leave Me Now. And Done For Me with Kehlani is somehow even better. The way they work off each other on that song with the fantastic writing where Charlie Puth can actually show himself in a negative and vulnerable light, it's damn impressive and compelling. So yeah, if you liked Attention and How Long and you want an entire album of that, this is exactly what that is, and it's pretty damn great. I will qualify it by saying it's an extremely light 8 out of 10, as I do still have a couple of production gripes, and I think that Charlie Puth could afford to maybe dip out of his falsetto a bit more often, but it's still better than it has any right to be, and it's a huge surprise for me in the best possible way. Probably won't make my best albums of the year or anything, but definitely one of the biggest steps in the right direction that I have heard all year. Fantastic job, Charlie Puth. This really did impress me.
Pressures of a new place roll my way. Jumpsuit, cover me. Jumpsuit, cover me.
Okay, now let's talk about an act where I really didn't know what to expect. The lead-off singles Jumpsuit and Nico and the Niners were odd. They were nothing like we got on Blurryface or Vessel. Instead of having more of a leaning towards hard rock and electronica, maybe with some elements of house music, it was definitely a weird one, a step in a new direction that I wasn't really sure I would like. And then I actually got the album, and listening to it the first couple of times, I was still on the fence. I wasn't sure if I liked it. And then, yeah, it was that third listen that did it. The hooks clicked into place almost instantly, and I started recognizing just how incredibly catchy this album is. And I know I tend to say that a lot in my reviews, but it's really impressive when an album can turn out to be this memorable without having that many listens beforehand. Obviously, this isn't quite as impressive as, say, Daughter's last album being catchy, but the fact that it manages to be catchy in a completely different way to Blurryface is what really impressed me about this. And that's before you get into the lyrics, which as per usual for 21 Pilots is way more detailed and drenched in lore than a lot of people would expect on first listen. You may listen to this and just hear a lightweight pop album, and that's fine if that's what you hear, but as a 21 Pilots fan who has studied their music as diligently as some of the biggest ones out there, I can tell you that this is easily one of the smartest and best written albums with one of the strongest messages that I have heard all year. Because this is an album directly confronting fame, the consequences of it, and mental health. And it tells it all through the story of our protagonist, Clancy, being held in the city of Dima, a metaphor for his own depression, where the 9 bishops, led by Nico, are metaphors for his insecurities. Those 9 bishops are trying to run Clancy's life and make him give in to that depression, and giving into the conformity that he was trying to escape on Blurryface. However, there's an underground movement that is trying to get him to join them and run away and fight against those insecurities, which he desperately tries to do here on songs like Levitate and Jumpsuit. And Tyler doesn't just relate this to his own depression, he relates it to the world around him. As on Neon Gravestones, he tackles how we tend to celebrate people who commit suicide, which sets a terrible example for other people who are contemplating suicide, who think that, well, maybe if I kill myself, I'll get this much attention, I'll get this much adulation. It's a mindset we don't mean to encourage, but one that we unfortunately do when we praise people and put them on pedestals after they're gone. In other words, this is an album tackling tackling strong themes of mental illness and advocating against the glamorization of mental illness, which is very easy to do in a society like ours that is trying so damn hard to be progressive and accepting. Because along the way, we may just encourage certain tendencies that aren't healthy for us at all. And paired with some of the catchiest hooks and best production of 21 Pilot's entire career, this is easily one of the best albums that I've heard all year. Easily a 9 out of 10. It may have taken me a few listens, but I honestly think I prefer this album to Blurryface at this point. It definitely isn't as accessible as that album, and it won't be for everyone, but if you take the time to listen to it, then you will hear an album that is so damn fulfilling and deep, and that so many critics are going to overlook so easily. Give this a chance, read along with the lyrics, trust me, it'll be worth it. So as the end of the year was getting steadily closer, I was approached by one of the band members of this group, Alterity, Dreria, who was mostly responsible for production on this new album, Afterlife. Now, I knew going into this project that it was a darkwave album, and that the band was already working on their next project and really just wanted my cursory thoughts on this one. So as someone who does actually like darkwave quite a bit, I decided to give it a listen just out of pure curiosity. And surprisingly, this took a few more listens than I expected, because I find myself at a bit of a weird impasse with this album. On the one hand, I really do like the sound that they go for here. It can frequently be really beautiful. This band has a great talent for getting great hooks and melodies going. And while the vocal production isn't always the best, all the vocalists themselves do a good job on it too. With my personal favorite being the recurring guest Maverick, who I understand might now be joining the band in some more full capacity if the new EP is any indication. So that's all positive. I really did enjoy listening to this many times over. But here's why, while this is naturally appealing to me, and I can go back to it pretty easily, I don't quite think it's a great project. And it comes down to not really taking that darkwave sound all the way. In a weird way, the vocal delivery and the way a lot of these songs are sung by the singers reminds me a lot more of a goth rock project. And in that vein, it's really catchy, it's really good. I love goth rock. But it's not exactly what I think the band was going for, and to accommodate those vocal performances, the production is also a little bit less tense, a little bit less loud and ragged. So that instead of darkwave, a lot of the time you kind of get the little brother, the predecessor of darkwave, that being synthpop. And again, it's definitely not bad, it sounds good, but again, I kind of expected a darkwave project, and most of what I got was more towards synthpop. I can definitely see the elements of darkwave in the way that the drums and the guitars are mixed into the production, but I kept feeling like those particular two instruments could afford to be a little bit louder, a bit scuzzier, really take over a bit more, and challenge everybody to just go a bit more bombastic and over the top. That's what the best darkwave does for me. It's thrilling, it's quick, it's sharp. And while this is very beautiful and frequently really atmospheric, it lacks that kick and excitement that would really push this project over the top for me. And if I did have to name one more gripe, it would kind of be the lyrics. Granted, when it comes to these kinds of genres, lyrics aren't always the main focus, but still, it could occasionally feel just a little bit too cliched and undercooked. And I felt that if you really put a strong narrative behind this album, it would just make it all the better. So my advice to Alterity would be sharpen up the instrumentation first, crank it up a notch, and see what you get from that. And if that inspires you to write out an epic story to match it, then go for it. Because we really don't have enough bands out there doing what you're trying to do. And on top of that, despite this sound being naturally appealing to me, it's not one that's easily done. And I definitely see a lot of promise here. So yeah, it's a light 7 out of 10. Definitely recommended if you're a fan of these kinds of genres. Again, don't expect to go into this with a completely, fully realized sound. This band is still finding their feet as far as I can tell, but you'll definitely still get a pleasant listen, and who knows, maybe it'll click for you even more than it did for me. Fine job, guys.
Got me nervous to speak, so I just won't say anything at all. I've got an urge to release, and you keep telling me to hold on.
Okay, now let's move on to a band who I gave up on long ago, The Neighborhood. Look, these guys had their big breakthrough back in 2013 when they dropped Sweater Weather, which then blew up and gave them a following for life. And look, I've said it before and I'll say it again, I am not a fan of this band. Initially, I thought I was okay with Sweater Weather, but it turns out no, I don't even like that song a few years down the road. And going back to each of their juvenile projects, one after another over the years, I have come to the conclusion that they are really not for me. But holy hell, guys, you didn't have to give up this spectacularly. The Neighborhood's new album is easily their worst one to date. The themes and framing are at their most pathetic and whiny. The writing itself is often just absolutely atrocious with terrible metaphors, and the production is so bad that I was honestly reminded of that new 30 Seconds to Mars album, America. This is a display of a band giving up in spectacular fashion to the point where I don't even know if their fans will enjoy this. It just doesn't sound pleasant or competent or even like it was fully finished. And yeah, I haven't got much to say about it. It's even worse than their last album, and it's a solid 3 out of 10. Not the worst out there, and their frontman is still competent enough that I can't call this absolutely unsalvageable, but I could say that about any of their albums, and out of those albums, it's easily the worst of them. Skip this, don't bother with it.
It's a lonely weekend. It's a lonely feeling without you.
Okay, let's finally talk about this new Kacey Musgraves album. Of the albums that I talked about at the beginning of 2018 in my most anticipated albums of the year, I've had a couple of really big hits and really big misses. Pusha T and Kyle Craft knocked it out of the park, while Kanye, The Wombats, and Churches all really kinda let me down. But then you have an act like, say, Franz Ferdinand, who released an album that is really good, just not as good as I want it to be. And to me, that's really what Golden Hour by Kacey Musgraves is. An example of an album where I know what it's trying to go for, but it's just really not what I want the music from this artist to sound like. Because in between her last album and this one, Kacey Musgraves fell in love and discovered a man who changed her entire perspective on life and decided to write an album inspired by that love. It's sweet and it's cute, but it's just nowhere near as smart or as cutting as her previous projects could be. I stand by that Same Trailer Different Park is one of my favorite albums of the decade, and that Pageant material has grown on me. But this, as the first track indicates, is a slow burn. One where on my first listen I really didn't like it, especially with the pop elements that kept coming into the production. But eventually, I got what it was doing, I got the atmosphere, and it did grow on me a fair bit. But with that said, there are still some really bad production choices here. Songs like High Horse in particular have weird instrumental flourishes that just don't flatter her voice. And unfortunately, some of the writing on these songs can feel really cloying and childish in a way that doesn't flatter her again. It's cutesy, but Kacey is capable of so much more than that. And I'm just so sad that more people heard this album than they did her last two, and will probably box her in as this cute little country singer that, oh, she's so adorable, when in fact she's the fiery presence who wrote songs like Merry-Go-Round and Pageant material. Again, this album mostly sounds pleasant, and sometimes the writing does work on songs like Space Cowboy and Lonely Weekend. Heck, I'll even say that Slow Burn is one of the more beautiful tracks that was released in 2018. But again, it's just not the kind of music I want to be hearing from Kacey, and even the best moments on this album have all been done better on some of her previous projects. So yeah, I'll give it a solid 7 out of 10. It's not a bad album, and I can see a lot of people really loving this. Heck, I know a lot of people already do. But yeah, it's just not really for me, and I do kind of hope that Kacey will take her music in a more fiery direction once she gets over this feeling that she's probably feeling for the first time. Look, I'm really happy for her. I'm glad that she's happy, but at least in this case, I don't think it really translated into the best music to complement her strengths. That's all. And that's my time, guys. Next up is the Record Roundup finale, and stick around to the end of that video because I have a bit of an announcement before I release my year-end lists. Either way, leave your thoughts on these albums in the comments down below, please subscribe so you don't miss a thing, and until the next time, I'm Finn, and this is The Social Tunes, signing off.